Tricia. You have found True Crime Radio on the iHeartRadio network, I might add. We have Dave live in our chat room at www.truecrimeradio.com/chat. And in just a little bit, we're going to welcome Robert M. Dudley. Mr. Dudley is the author of the book, It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. Also joining us will be Bessie, our administrator extraordinaire, who is also, I would call, an expert on the Jacob Wetterling case, and we'll have all the details and the latest, and there is a lot going on in that case. But first, let me give you a quick update of the Teresa Sievers murder investigation. Teresa Sievers found bludgeoned to death in her home at the end of June. Her husband, Mark Sievers' best friend, Curtis Wainwright, has been arrested for the crime. Now, Curtis Wainwright was in a Missouri jail for quite a while. The Dr. Teresa Sievers case has been covered by NBC2 for quite some time. They've been doing a great job. Now, NBC2 got a copy of all visitor and phone call logs from the Missouri jail of Curtis Wainwright's, all of those. Now, Trent Kelly from NBC2 called every single number. He called over 300 numbers, and Wainwright had over 18 hours of phone calls, over $400. And as was pointed out by a very sharp Web Sleuths member, how can Curtis Wainwright spend $400 on phone calls when Angie has to wait on tables? Very good question. Now, some calls Wright made on behalf of inmates who are out of time. Other calls were to his wife and father. 4 or 5 numbers are no longer in service, and one of those numbers includes a number from Miami. Who would he be calling in Florida? I don't know. Now, there's a preacher who knows Angie's family, Angie being Curtis's Curtis's wife. Anyway, a preacher who knows Angie's family visited Wright in jail to deliver him a Bible. And according to the preacher, the defense that Wright is going to have is he's going to say, hey, I wasn't in Florida. And his neighbors supposedly will testify that Wright was at home in Missouri at the time of Teresa Sievers' death. So there you go. That story changes minute by minute. And, of course, next week we'll have another update for you. Right now, let's get right to it. There has been a case that has captured the hearts and the minds of everybody in the United States from October 22nd, 1989, and that is the kidnapping of Jacob Wetterling. Now, he was abducted by a masked gunman while riding his bike with his brother and a friend on a rural road near his home in St. Joseph, Minnesota. The abduction takes place near the driveway of Robert and Rita Rassier. It's their farm. Okay, so he was abducted at gunpoint. There are witnesses. Now, finally, we have a person of interest in the case. And joining us right now, let's talk about all of this. He's going to make sense of this wild and crazy case. They've had so many ups and downs. Robert M. Dudley. Mr. Dudley, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's start with the basics here. How in the world did you get involved in the Jacob Wetterling disappearance enough to write a book, enough to be, you're really enmeshed in this? How did that all come about?
Well, I remember that when the kidnapping occurred in 1989, it was all the news. I live in west central Wisconsin, and it certainly made the news there. It was on every day, and that was the year I happened to get married and graduate from college, and soon after started raising a family of my own. And every time that case is always in the back of my mind. Every time I'm out with the kids, and get in any kind of a situation. Maybe we're in the shopping mall and you lose track of one of them for just a moment. I would think about that case. And I guess fast forward to 2010, I heard an update on the story as I was driving through Cold Spring, heading back to the airport. And I didn't quite catch everything that was going on, but when I got home, I Googled it and learned about they had dug up the farm near where Jacob was abducted. And I decided to do a little bit more, investigating and checking, Googling and so forth. And I found a lot of interesting information. I found that the case was unlike anything I had imagined. The fact that it occurred on a dead-end road in a very small town of about 2,000 or 3,000 people, about the size of the town I grew up in. Mm-hmm. And there was a masked man with a gun and 2 witnesses. It just seemed so unusual. And I'd come to the area for work and I just decided to do some more research. I started focusing on newspaper archives. Started with the St. Cloud Times, went into the Painesville Press, Cold Spring Record, and so forth. And I didn't set out intending to write a book.
Mm-hmm.
It just sort of evolved. I was doing a lot of research. I felt that there was a lot of misinformation. I think that there was a lot of thought out there that maybe the investigators didn't work hard enough on the case, and that was absolutely not the case. They worked tirelessly for the last 26 years. And
Mr. Dudley, we're going to...
misconceptions.
Right, and we're going to get to those misconceptions because this case, I had no idea how many twists and turns Jacob Wetterling's kidnapping had in it. I had no idea, and I thought I followed the case closely. Apparently not, because we have some very interesting information that we're going to tell you about tonight. Also, Bessie, our administrator, who actually watches over and joins in on the Jacob Wetterling Forum, will be with us as well. And we're talking with Robert M. Dudley. Mr. Dudley wrote the book, It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. We have a whole show. You have got to stay right here, okay, by this podcast, because the interesting tidbits are going to amaze you. Coming up right after this on True Crime Radio on the iHeartRadio Network. Back in a sec. Welcome back to True Crime Radio on the iHeartRadio Network. My name is Tricia Griffith. I am the very proud owner of WebSleuths.com, the absolute best and most delicious true crime forum on the Internet. With us tonight is one of our top administrators, Bessie. Hi, Bessie. I wanted to make sure you're still there.
I'm here.
Okay, great. We're talking about the Jacob Wetterling case. Jacob Wetterling was abducted October 22nd, 1989 by gunpoint while he was riding bikes with a friend and his brother. There has been a break in the case. There's a person of interest. There's DNA. But it took a long time to get there. From 1989 to this date, lots of things happen. And to fill us in on everything, we welcome back Robert M. Dudley. Mr. Dudley is the author of the book, It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. Okay, we established that basically you just started kind of investigating it, and it snowballed into finally where you wrote a book about Jacob Wetterling. Let's talk about the early time of the investigation. Even in this day and age, Mr. Dudley, it's really rare for a kid to be kidnapped by gunpoint with other kids watching. I mean, I can count on my hand how many times that has happened. Back then in 1989, even more rare. What was the police? Did the police give this the proper amount of attention in the very beginning? Was it a big deal back in 1989?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, it was very rare circumstance. Any one of those individual circumstances would be rare on its own, but all of those combined is extremely rare. There was up to 70 or perhaps 90 investigators involved in the case within days. So the reaction was swift, and it was definitely taken seriously, and full force. And every agency available was on the case. The FBI was there the next day, and it was a multi-agency effort, and they absolutely gave it the best effort they possibly could have. They
could. And because of the Jacob Wetterling case, there has been changes in our laws, in our national laws, and if we have time, we'll get into that. But a lot of people have been affected in a good way. Jacob's parents have done many good things as they deal with their heartbreak of not knowing where their son is. Okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the suspects, not the person of interest that we know of today. Let's go back to the beginning here. There were some suspects, I would imagine, who just had their lives torn up, right? Let's talk about the first one, the first person who everybody went, hey, that's the guy that took Jacob Wetterling. What happened to him?
Well, I think the first person that was publicly known at the time, his name was Dwayne Hart. He was actually arrested as a result of the wide net that the investigators cast in the area investigating Jacob's case. And he was charged and found guilty of abusing a number of children, and to this day is still in a state facility in Moose Lake. So he was pretty well, I guess, established in the public mind as a suspect. I don't know how serious he was looked at, or how serious he was considered a suspect by investigators. The media articles at the time clearly indicate that he was being investigated for not only Jacob's abduction, but for Jared's in Cold Spring, as well as the cases in Paynesville. They simply couldn't tie him to those crimes. But the timing of the FBI's withdrawal of the case was almost immediately after his arrest. So I think that kind of led to reinforce the perception that he was a suspect.
He was the guy.
And
but
then go ahead.
I was going to say the good thing is, even though he was not eventually tied to Jacob's case, he's off the street now. Thank goodness. So he was a monster that was caught in this wide net, who deserved to be caught. But it sounds like maybe about that time everybody went, oh, that's him, okay, and like you said, packed up their bags and left. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
Oh, that's fine. And then you. There was really a lot of, like you mentioned, a lot of ups and downs. There were sightings. There was this or that along, for the next 25 years. And then in 2010 is when I really had my interest peaked in the case, when they dug up the farm at the end of the driveway where Jacob was abducted from. And the person that lived there, Dan Rassier, was named a suspect, named a person of interest in the case following that digging event.
And may I ask why they named him a person of interest? Was there anything to connect him other than he lived there?
Well, there's never been any evidence. Anything that's been known publicly was strictly circumstantial. He lived there. He was by himself. He didn't have an alibi. There really wasn't anything publicly known. And that's one of the frustrations, I think, the public, especially the last couple of years, have been clamoring for information to be released because there just hasn't been much. And to be fair, there wasn't a lot of direct evidence. Mm-hmm. We're finding out now that there was actually quite a bit of at least circumstantial evidence and a lot more suspects in the case than previously thought. And it's kind of interesting because up until a week ago, you had bookends for persons of interest. In the beginning, you had Dwayne Hart, and at the end, you had Dan Rassier. And a lot of I guess people who follow the case would and were very familiar with it would tend to one side or the other. And the thing is, what's interesting to me is all the insiders or people that really study the case, that have really done research. Consistently, none of those people felt either one of those were responsible. There's very few people that were in the Dwayne Hart camp and very few people in the Dan Rassier camp. So it's a little bit perplexing, And again, we don't have the benefit of the investigative files necessarily, so we have to kind of do our own research. But it's just interesting that somewhere in the middle, and there's a number of rabbit holes that just really strange stories that turned out to be stories.
Let's talk about one of those stories really quickly. We're talking with Robert M. Dudley, author of the book It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. There are new developments in the case, but we're talking about leading up to those developments. And there have been some very odd stories in this during this time frame when everybody was looking for Jacob. But give us your kind of strangest twist and turn story, if you will, please.
Boy, that's a tough one. There was a suspect. It's unusual. I live in west central Wisconsin, and very near Eau Claire, and there was a suspect who lived in Eau Claire. Mm-hmm. I guess when I say suspect, I mean on people's mind. I don't know how serious a suspect he was in investigators' mind, but he was someone that was investigated by authorities, and he actually had come forward. How the story starts, he had come forward as an informant on someone else, mm-hmm. and And then that someone else and two other men were arrested on charges of child pornography, and subsequently relatives of theirs, a granddaughter was abused, and then the tables kind of turned on the guy that came in as an informant. But it's really convoluted, really hard to follow. And, I found court cases, and I found lie detector tests, and I found inquiries with the Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia, a lot of different things. And, I don't know how much time investigators spent on that, but there's clearly a lot of information there, and it just didn't really seem to go anywhere.
Well, and the thing is, and I think you will agree to this, you bring somebody's name into this case and say, hey, I think this guy's a suspect in the disappearance of Jacob Wetterling, and the guy may have all kinds of weird things happening in his life but has nothing to do with the case. It can ruin an innocent person's life. And
exactly.
we talked about,
exactly.
Is it Dan Rassier?
Right.
Fortunately, from what I understand, he has not let this, being accused of being involved in the disappearance of Jacob, he hasn't let this bring him down, which is absolutely amazing. Well, I want to talk a little bit more. Let's kind of fast forward here a bit. Let's talk about what happened. How did this case finally, there are all these suspects in and out. And Bessie, I'm going to get to you in just a minute, I promise. But all these different suspects, people reporting on each other, none of it is panning out. The years are going by here. We're coming upon, in another 4 years, it'll be 30 years. Finally, though, we have a person of interest. And there's some people out there who think that, Mr. Dudley, you are the one that steered the conversation into the correct lane, if you will. Tell us about the notes and what you found and the whole story, because it's absolutely fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, right now, I can't sit here and say that it was me. I did turn the name in to the FBI in Stearns County in late summer of 2014.
And that was Daniel Heinrich, the suspect.
You
did turn
Daniel
that name in.
Heinrich, correct.
Okay.
And actually, to tie together the previous on the Eau Claire suspect, I was actually meeting with a private investigator about his information on that case, or that person. And to make a long story short, he tells me that he spent 60 hours with Dwayne Hart interviewing him in his jail cell. And so I thought that was interesting. I started asking questions about Dwayne, things that I knew about him. Of course, he was mentioned in the early media accounts. And he said that he apologized for not remembering a lot, and he had this file that had been inadvertently destroyed 15 years earlier. And there was a series of handwritten notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled the documents out of a folder I had with me, and I said, "Are these your notes?" And this man, who was probably I would guess in his mid-70s, all of a sudden looked like he was 19 again, and he was just his eyes popped out. And where did you get those?
He thought his notes. He thought his notes to the case had been. He thought his notes that he had written all those years ago about Jacob Wetterling or about Wayne Hart that they had been destroyed. Dwayne Hart, excuse me, they've been destroyed. And here you are saying, "Are these yours?" I can imagine he would look like a 19-year-old again. Please continue.
Right. And he's still very passionate about the case to this day. I just talked to him yesterday, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, in these notes, Dwayne Hart is very, very forthcoming about children that he had molested over the years. I don't know the specifics of, I haven't talked to the victims or anything, so I don't know if he was softening. I would imagine he was probably softening, but he was naming names and he was admitting to doing these things. And the thing that struck me about the notes is it appeared, you look at him, he's a suspect, he's a bad guy, could have done it. He had a terrible MO, could have escalated to a kidnapping. It wasn't his typical MO. He was a groomer. He would use money, booze, drugs, things like that to get kids to go along with what he was doing to them. But the interesting thing, the theme I saw in the notes was that he seemed to be being cooperative. There are places where you wonder if he's if he's trying to direct the investigator somewhere else, but the general theme seemed like he was trying to help the case. They were showing him sketches. They were describing cars and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
excuse me, Mr. Dudley, we only have about 2 minutes, so I just want to refresh everybody. We're talking about Dwayne Hart, one of the suspects in the case. He's being very helpful to the police in the Jacob Wetterling disappearance.
Right.
So you're looking at these notes and reading it, and please continue. We have about a minute and 40 seconds left.
Okay, all right. So I sent the notes to the FBI and Stearns County, and that weekend, Saturday evening, I got an email from the FBI agent working the case that wondering where I got the notes, and I explained the whole story. And then I followed that up with an email a couple days later saying, I went through the notes again. I went through my notes of the conversation with the private investigator, and Hart was specifically pointing to Dan Heinrich as the likely perp because he drove a dark blue car, four-door, had a fascination with police scanners, wore camouflage clothing. He felt he looked like the sketches in the case, and he was one of a handful of people that he suggested, but he was the one that recurring throughout the notes. And the investigator himself, I asked him, who did Dwayne Hart think did this? And he pointed to Dan Heinrich.
And how old are these notes? So I turned
that information.
How old are these notes, may I ask again?
They are from 1990, February 1990. So
all that time that was in there, you had this Dwayne Hart who's being helpful, blabbing to the police, obviously knows of Daniel Heinrich, and said, hey, look at this guy, and listed,
right.
He's got the car, he's got the M.O. We're going to come back. Right. We're going to talk with Bessie, the administrator on Web Sleuths, who also handles the Jacob Wetterling Forum. We still have more to talk about. Don't panic. We're going to wrap this up nice and neat for you. True Crime Radio on the iHeart Radio Network. Back after this. All right, we're back. And we're talking with author Robert M. Dudley. Mr. Dudley wrote the book, It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. He disappeared at gunpoint, actually, in 1989. Finally, we have a break in the case, and Mr. Dudley has been filling us in on the details and the twists and turns, and we don't have enough time to go over everything. Also, Bessie is here. Bessie is our administrator on WebSleuths.com and is in charge, basically, of the Jacob Wetterling discussion on WebSleuths. And, Bessie, there are so many different areas of this case, but one thing I think we want to kind of clear up for everybody, there are some cases that are kind of connected to the disappearance of Jacob that happened before 1989. Why don't you tell us what those are all about?
Yes, to give you a little background for those who don't know, there were a series of attacks on young, adolescent boys in Painesville between 1986 and 1988. And in some of these cases, the boys were either knocked off of a bicycle, or a few had actually been to a place called Papa's Pizza earlier that night. They all generally, describe the same type of person, short and pudgy, chubby legs, dark, kind of dark hair or dark face. He was masked in some attacks. He would ask their ages or what grade they were in, which was, a big clue or to tie him into Jacob's case, because that was one of the things he asked the boys. He wanted to know what age, how old they were, what grade they were in.
Bessie, let me interrupt you real quickly. When was one of the first attacks reported? Did you say 1987?
Between 1986 and late fall of 1988.
Wow. So he was operating long before Jacob. Okay, please continue.
Yeah. And in those cases, in some cases the victims were groped. In some cases they screamed or they fought back and he ran off. One poor boy was actually attacked twice and told him, hey, you got me already. You got me last time or something. And so he ran off. Mm-hmm. But then in January of 1989, a young man named Jared, January 13th, I believe it was, 1989, was kidnapped and taken off in the car and went through a very violent, brutal assault that I believe lasted 3 hours. It was after his case, after his kidnapping, that Heinrich's name first came on the radar.
Mm-hmm.
But Jared couldn't positively identify him from a lineup.
Mm-hmm.
He gave a description of the car. The detectives, went to Heinrich's place of employment, looked at the car. There were a few things that didn't quite match up to Jared's description. Now, what happened between then, from January 1989 until October 1989, I don't know. And I'm looking at the affidavit, and it just kind of drops off after January 1989 and then picks up again when Jacob was kidnapped.
Was kidnapped. So Daniel Heinrich was a suspect.
And after that, Heinrich was re-interviewed and re-investigated, and I believe it was during that time that Dwayne Hart was interviewed, and the information that Rob has talked about came forth.
And so here we have Dwayne Hart, a known pedophile, who's saying, look, there's this other dude I know, and it matches what he's doing, that's not my method of operation, that's not my MO, it's what he's doing. That was in 1990. So in 1989, this Daniel Heinrich, who has now been officially named the person of interest in the case, way back in 1989, he had been interviewed and was on the radar. I think, obviously, a lot has changed since then, and I don't think something like this could happen again where you would have a Daniel Heinrich out there that would just be let go. That we have so many other tools to use that we could nail this person down and capture them. Back then we didn't. And also back then, Bessie and Rob, if you'd like to jump in on this too, back then it was a different time. You hear about this poor kid getting caught twice by Daniel Heinrich, and it was just a different time, especially boys getting attacked. I don't think it was probably not even mentioned. It probably wasn't really even talked about, was it? Bessie, do you remember if it was ever really mentioned or brought out? I remember back in that time it was not. We didn't even know really about these people that take kids and kill them. That it was such a massive thing back then. Do you remember?
Well, in my day, there were. I had an older brother, and there were always some whispers about some coach or some teacher or somebody in the neighborhood, some guy in the neighborhood who was molesting boys, and it was always kept very hush hush.
Exactly, especially with boys. I think there's even that stigma today with male rape, and it does happen, unfortunately. So thank you, Bessie. I'm glad we cleared that up. So now we know Daniel Heinrich was operating in that area, doing the exact same thing that he did to Jacob Wetterling. Now, Jacob has not been found. I've always said, and I said this off the air to you, Mr. Dudley, I feel since the Elizabeth Smart case and since then, all bets are off. To me, Jacob could be somewhere alive, growing, and doing who knows what. That's what I hope for his case. We're going to come back here, and we'll wrap up the interview, and then we're going to talk with Bessie about the next step. That will be our latest cold case on Web Sleuths. One of, 10, 20,000 cold cases we have on Web Sleuths, and that's not even all of them that are out there. So many cold cases that could use our help. We'll get with Bessie on that, and then we'll wrap it up with Mr. Robert Dudley, author of the book, It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. You can go to websleuths.com. You'll find Jacob's case in the missing section. We have a whole forum for Jacob's case and a lot of members who have been on this case for years. A lot of information is there, but I'd recommend getting the book, too. It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. We'll be back right up to wrap it up with Robert M. Dudley and to continue on with our wonderful, amazing Bessie, all of that and even more in our final segment of True Crime Radio on the iHeart Radio Network. Back right after this. right, we're back with our final segment on True Crime Radio on the iHeartRadio Network. Tricia Griffith here at the controls. And we are talking with Robert Dudley. Mr. Dudley is the author of the book, It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. Also joining us is Bessie, our administrator extraordinaire on Web Sleuths. We're talking about the Jacob Wetterling case because there is a big new development. Now, it seems that Daniel Heinrich, let me go back up. Jacob Wetterling went missing by gunpoint in 1989. Daniel Heinrich had already been interviewed concerning cases of boys being attacked on bikes. His name was out there. It was in the files. And our friend here tonight, Mr. Dudley, had a file and found the old notes from a detective in there. And in that was a discussion about Daniel Heinrich. He turned it over to I believe the FBI. Now we know that Daniel Heinrich is connected to the disappearance of Jacob Wetterling. And Mr. Dudley, explain to us in detail how they finally were able to connect Heinrich to Jacob Wetterling.
Well, I think if you go back to the beginning of the case, as Bessie mentioned, that you had the Paynesville cases, and the chief of police of Paynesville comes forward in January of 1990 and points to Heinrich as a suspect in those cases and somebody to be looked at in Jacob's case. And you have him arrested. I shouldn't say arrested. You have him brought in for questioning by the FBI. I'm looking for the date here. I think February 9th, 1990. I think what's interesting is, Al Garber was the FBI supervisor of the case, and he wrote a book called Striving to be the Best. And in his book, he describes a man who was picked up for questioning, and John Douglas, the legendary profiler for the FBI, was the one who profiled Jacob's abductor, and I'm pretty certain that he is the one who had the interview room arranged with special lights, the flag, and the furniture in a certain way to make Heinrich feel uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, he requested attorney and was released. But it's just interesting with what we know now, what we can tie together, mm-hmm. how he fell off the radar over the years, especially in light of the fact we know now he had tires and shoe prints that were consistent with those left at the scene of Jacob's abduction. We know that he has Heinrich's DNA is a match for Jared's abduction.
Okay, now Jared was. Let me just briefly say, Jared was the young man who was abducted and brutally attacked and assaulted. He did live, and that was right a few months before Jacob Wetterling's abduction. So we have DNA that attaches him to Jared's case. Okay, please continue.
Right. So you have the DNA now locking him to Jared. You also have, if you go back to the beginning of the case, investigators from FBI, Stearns County, BCA consistently said they were certain Jared's and Jacob's cases were connected. Mm-hmm. They were certain of it. 2004, a man named Kevin comes forward and tells investigators that he drove on the driveway. Suddenly, they do a 180 on their connection to the case, and they break that connection, and they feel that it was an abduction on foot. I think the big question is, how is it that the presence of Kevin's tires negates the known fact that there was a pretty solid consistency between Heinrich's car tires mm-hmm. and the tires left at the scene, as well as the footprints.
It was like a dog getting a whiff of meat. They turned and ran to it without thinking. I don't understand that. That's very puzzling.
It is very puzzling, especially in light of the fact they were sure those cases were connected, and they had a sure link, which they didn't talk about, but they didn't talk about it specifically, but they've said several times there's a sure link between the case. We know now the sure link was the groping, and
Now, when you say the groping, what do you mean?
Well, in the warrant, Jared had reported that the perp in his case had groped his testicles and penis, mm-hmm. And that was now released in the Wetterling case as well.
Okay.
And that was the Sure link.
Okay, now.
So how do they break that Sure link?
Right.
And the presence of tires? How they break that back then? And now we have the luxury of DNA now, and I know it's still going to take more evidence to bring charges against Heinrich, but bottom line, it appears that 1 + 1 = 2 here, and it's just it's going to be a little bit hard to prove without more evidence.
Exactly, but we do have the circumstantial evidence. Have they said anything about any DNA link with Jacob Wetterling and Daniel Heinrich? Anything physical connecting them?
No.
Nothing.
No.
Okay, now didn't Daniel Heinrich, didn't he brag to some people that he was involved in this case way back in 1989, or was that just rumor? Also, didn't they find child porn on his computer and concluded that it may have been Jacob? Is that not true?
No.
I have no knowledge of that.
Okay,
I was just so far there was nothing that they found, and they found a lot of child porn, but nothing that directly connects and links him to Jacob.
Mr. Dudley, where do we go from here? We have about a minute left before we get to a Bessie segment. What happens now with the Jacob Wetterling case? What's the next move?
Well, right now, the investigators need someone to come forward with the information. I mean, it would be highly unusual that Danny Heinrich did not tell someone. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a very common. That's how most criminals are found. Is they tell someone, and then we need that person or persons to come forward. I think in the press conference that the Wetterlings had, Jerry pointed that out exactly. It's not any one person can solve this. You need the public's help, and that's always been the case with this case, because there wasn't a lot of physical evidence at the scene, and if someone knows something, they have to come forward with it, and that's what it's going to take.
And also,
we don't know. They certainly released a lot of information. Maybe there's other information they haven't released. We don't know that.
And also, somebody might know something that they don't even realize they know. So no matter how insignificant it is, if you think you know anything, just contact the police. Google Jacob Wetterling, and you can find all the numbers and everything that you need right there. Mr. Dudley, thank you so much. Again, the book is It Can't Happen Here, The Search for Jacob Wetterling. We're going to have you on as this case continues to break. Hopefully, we'll be having you on more and more. And thank you for coming on, Mr. Dudley. You've been absolutely fascinating and a wonderful guest. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tricia. It's been a pleasure being here. Thanks,
okay. Becky. Take care. Bye-bye. Let me go to Dave in the control room, not Dave in the chat room. Dave in control room, about how much time do we have left, my darling? Okay, Bessie, you have about 5 minutes. Let's go to the next step in our cold case on Web Sleuths. You're on, my dear.
All right. Well, real quick, going back to Jacob, I just want to mention that Jacob's case has been one of the longest consistently running discussions on Web Sleuths going back to 2004.
That's right.
And there are many members who have been dedicated to his case and have, consistently posted and taken an interest in it. And I wouldn't even begin to name the names because there are many of them, and I'll forget somebody.
Well,
but I just want to make that now. But this really has been a consistent discussion that's gone on for over 10 years.
Exactly. And even if you don't want to join in, at least come and read, because it is absolutely fascinating. Okay, the next step, our cold case. I'm sorry, Bessie, what were you going to say?
No, I was just going to say congratulations to those members who have been so dedicated.
Yes. Absolutely. They're the best. We love it. I'm telling you, we do have the best members on Web Sleuths, if I may brag. Thank you. Okay, you're on.
All right. Well, our cold case this week is from Lake Charles, Louisiana, 1990, Jesslyn Broussard. Jesslyn was a clerk in a convenience store, the Wizard Fast Stop on Kirkland Street in Lake Charles. April 17th, 1990. It was her second night on the job. She cashed a check, her own check, in the cash register at 2:04, and at 2:07 the call came through that there had been a shooting. She was shot through the service window and they were able to find some fibers from the service window that led to a bicycle about a block away. That's really all that's known right now. Police say they had somebody in mind, at least one person in mind that they've considered over the years that could be involved, but they don't have enough evidence to make an arrest. And so they need information from the public. Somebody knows something. So you can call the Lake Charles Police Department at 337-491-1456 or Crime Stoppers at 337-439-2222.
Bessie,
and
isn't it
gentleman's family would very much like to see her murder solved.
I mean, just think of it. 1 minute you're there, and then next minute this happens, and you don't know what really happened. It's absolutely terrifying. And again, we want to stress, even if you think, oh, I don't know anything about that case. Yeah, I was around there, I saw something, but it doesn't mean anything. Not true. Call them.
Not true.
I mean,
please,
yes.
Maybe you heard something. Maybe you overheard a conversation between a neighbor, from a neighbor or a friend or something. Somebody knows something.
Absolutely.
So call it in.
Just call it in. And you can find this case where on Web Sleuth, Bessie?
It's in the cold case forum. Jesselyn Broussard, Lake Charles, Louisiana, April 17th, 1990. Jesselyn Broussard.
Wow, 1990. That was so long ago, and it's still a cold case. And again, that's just one of probably hundreds of thousands of cold cases out there, and we have a smattering of them on Web Sleuth. We have about, I would even hate to venture to guess, Bessie, how many cold cases we have. I know it's probably in the tens of thousands, if not maybe more. Who knows? But, Bessie, we'll have you on again. We'll have you on again next week, and we'll have the next step. We'll have another cold case that we'll feature. And
I hope we'll bring Rob back, and I hope we'll bring Jacob's case back, because there's so much more to talk about in Jacob's case.
We didn't even scratch the surface. I mean, we just got the bare outline. That case is so fascinating and terrifying and frustrating. It's all of those things rolled up into one. You can go to websleuth.com and just scroll down. You'll see the Jacob Wetterling case I believe it's in the missing forum, isn't it, Bessie?
It's under missing but not forgotten.
Yeah, and Jacob has his own sub-forum, so it's right there. You can just go in and start reading. We have the list of the case players. We have, timelines. We have all kinds of great stuff for you. Okay, Bessie, next week, another cold case will be featured, and next week on True Crime Radio, it's going to be good. I'm not sure yet who's going to join us, but trust me, it will be good. Just remember, when you go out there, behave a little bit, or at least don't get caught, okay? Don't become one of my stories. That just wouldn't work at all. Check out websleuth.com if you'd like to register. All you need to do is go to websleuth.com, and you look at the little top bar there, and it says register. You click on that, and boom, you're in. So give us a chance, okay? I think you'll really enjoy Web Sleuth. And let's see, Dave, thank you so much for everything on chat. We do appreciate it, and thank you so much, everybody. We'll talk to you soon, next week, same time, same place. True Crime Radio on the iHeartRadio Network.